Our journey begins. It's day 46, July 16, 2024, and I'm currently walking under the beautiful starlit sky. Oh man, the stars are just wonderful. Otherwise, there is no morning light yet, and you can hear the crickets, and it's about perfect weather, about 72 degrees. It's beautiful. So I wanted to do some thinking through of this human nature stuff because I realized that, so this movie idea that I've been contemplating the last couple days, maybe the last week or so, been trying to figure out, okay, what cool movie to do, and then I figured out this cool plot and everything. But then, really, the plot is very interesting, but for most people, is that actually what's keeping them from changing the world? Them just keeping back the part of themselves that wants to do the right thing? And I don't know that it is. I think for a lot of people, well, I guess I could just change a couple parts of the movie and then it would still be applicable. But basically the idea is really human nature is what needs to be addressed, I think. So the movement idea was that, get a group of people together that will create a force by which the best possible world is brought about in the best possible way. And when you say that, it's like, oh, that makes sense. But then in practicality, okay, but what if that group of people still has issues or something, because human nature will come up, and you have to have a lot of mechanisms within the movement to prevent the bad parts of human nature from taking over, essentially. You'd still need to address the human nature thing. And then, what about everyone else that doesn't want to be a part of the movement? And let's say that they will have human nature, and if their human nature is bad, then how exactly are you going to adjust that situation? Let me review my notes. So I guess I'm just trying to kind of think through some various ideas of human nature, evolved human nature, and see if I can come up with a decent explanation or a decent thought on how to create something where I'm not sure, but basically I was looking into spiral dynamics yesterday, because that is that's the general trajectory of human nature, of human consciousness, sorry. And you sort of go through various stages, red, orange, green, violet, yellow, So, and it all kind of makes sense. And if everyone we're in, I think, the violet stage or beyond in terms of consciousness, then yeah, we would have no issues. And then it's like, well, so maybe this is the problem, because the thought yesterday I had about science fiction, or in my research about how science fiction books only ever portray really a couple different types of possible societies, like socialism, capitalism, etc., because they play out human nature. Like, even if you come up with this ideal state, like, let's say you developed a state where it was this beautiful, perfect utopia, but then you had to control human nature. So then it kind of became a totalitarian state. And like, is that what you want? Well, not really, no. But that's what you'd have to play it out to be, because that's what it would turn into, because there's no other way to assess things. And then I also was listening to something and was thinking through this, like, in terms of human nature, and I think it's very similar to like evolved nature, or sort of our evolutionary nature. And when I say that, I just mean the sense in which a lot of the things come down to like biological things. But a lot of the times, and this is no secret, a lot of the worst, the people that turn out to be people that do bad things, often it's because they had a bad childhood. It's pretty rare that, and it's sort of a synergy in the worst way possible. Not in the worst way possible, but like, it's a bad synergy, because essentially, let's say you had to have two parents who treat their kid poorly. Like, the parents aren't terrible people, but they just treat their kid poorly. But the combination of that means that the kid is getting an overdose during the kid's brain formation period. And so that totally messes up the kid. So then you go a couple generations down to where it's like a continual set of brain formation, and sort of you create a human nature within that family. I'm just sort of playing out a possible scenario. I don't know if this is scientifically true or anything. But then you could create like a human nature within that family that's like quite traumatic. And then what would you expect? It's like a continual worsening of the situation. And then eventually you get someone who just wants to destroy the world or whatever. And I think, although it's not necessarily that bad around the world, that you could attribute most of the problems. See, this is where it gets tricky, because the world is so complicated. You could attribute at least some of the problems in the world to the issues to do with raising children. And this is where things get interesting, because then it's like, well, what is the solution to that? But yeah, and then if you did say that, then you'd have to be like, okay, but then that means that that your solution is only to raise better people, but then what happens to the older people that aren't better? And that's where I don't think it has to be something where it's only for the new generations. I think whatever you're developing to help solve the human nature issue should also help solve the people that are already around. And so yeah, I'm gonna try to brainstorm how exactly would you change human nature? And I think I've been thinking about all these things, but I haven't exactly attributed it to like, oh, because of human nature. Like, for example, I was thinking through capturing the imagination, as though capturing the imagination itself was something that was necessary in order to keep people sort of involved. But that's sort of not the root cause. The capturing the imagination is in order to keep people who would normally, because of their human nature, be doing bad things, entertained enough with good things to do the good things. What else was I sort of... Yeah, like falling in love, capturing the imagination. Those things can sort of help create something where it's changed lives, where people's lives are changed. So here's the deal. There are a lot, I'd say millions of people who were nurtured at least decently, who like their brains are formed decently enough that they can, you could say with some degree of where you could say at some level that person is able to make their own decision. And I know there's some philosophers who say, well, no one ever has free will. It's just the sum of past decisions that ancestors have made. And I think there's no way of exactly knowing that. Yeah, that's very true, but it's not like, yeah, I mean, it's probably likely mostly true. Like, I'm not just here deciding to work on this. The reason I'm voice recording is probably a lot to do with the circumstances that happened to me. And so then that points to a potential solution. The circumstances that happen to someone. If we change all of the circumstances that happen to people, is that how we solve the issue? Like, if someone's addicted to a harmful substance, it's probably because they got life issues, right? They probably made a bad decision in the past. They're probably not confident in themselves, or whatever reason it is. Like, if you change their circumstances where those things are not pressing and they're able to deal with those things and they start turning their life around, then yeah, it's possible that they would be able to not be addicted to to that harmful substance anymore. Okay, so then the question becomes, okay, so can you actually change human nature? Like, can you evolve human nature? Can you do it without a totalitarian system where you control everyone's education, sort of a propaganda type state? Can you sort of inspire the evolution versus forcing the evolution? And then a big question is like, well, there was a potentially a second question before I got to the third one. Oh, I guess the question was like, how would society change if you could change human nature? So let's say that you could imagine where human nature evolved, where every person was simply like See, it's really tricky because, okay, so I'll just give you the third question, which is, would you want to? And I suppose all of this does come back to that same question of like, what is the ultimate best state that we're going for, and what is the ultimate best way to get there? Those two questions, I think, ultimately are the answers to everything. But I'm sort of exploring that in the intermediate stage. Because there's sort of the original Constitution, which we're going to have set up an idea of what we think we need to do. And so we do need to think through these ideas. But yeah, like, would you want to? And that's so hard to know. Like, okay, what is a human nature thing that often causes issues? So a lot of the human nature things that cause issues, people have religions to help with those. So a lot of the sins in religions are the things about human nature that you'd probably want to get rid of if you could. So this includes like stealing. Like, in what instance, like, okay, there's maybe some survival or like some couple other instances where you'd steal not because you are trying to do a bad thing and I guess you could say that about most stealing is because people feel like they need to or whatever, but like in general, people don't go stealing banks or whatever because their human nature is such that presents itself, that option would cross the mind of humans, but their nature would not be pulling them to do something like that, essentially. So then the question becomes, is human nature, what exactly is human nature? Is it just like the need to survive, and so you rob the bank because you want to survive? I think it's probably more so spiral dynamics type stuff with levels of consciousness. And so you could say robbing a bank is because they want to have more money. And then you could say that's because they wanted to, or whatever. Like, there's so many different reasons why someone might want to do stuff like that. And then you could say, yeah, like, it was their nurturing. When they were growing up, they were in a rough situation or whatever. And then they got involved with the wrong people, and then together those bad people created a bad synergy where they got together and sort of funneled themselves to do worse things. And then because of that, yeah, you have this person who does bad things. Yeah, because like, because when it comes to changing human nature, that gets very dangerous. Well, first of all, like, is it possible? Which I guess is the main question I'm trying to explore. But like, is it possible to do in a way that's not like a totalitarian state type of situation? Yeah, the very early morning light starting to show. Just in the sense that the sky is slightly brighter on the one side than the other. So, yeah, I think in general, all those things like capturing the imagination, helping people understand the inside psychology of why they just convince themselves that making a better world now is not possible. But then there's the whole deal with, this just, I feel like I'm wasting my effort because this just gets into the whole perpetual argument of religion and other stuff about human nature and it being evil, and then you need a special God that will save you from your evil nature, or will at least make the things that you do with your evil nature okay, and like all this stuff about like a lot of, I don't know, a lot of the Christian type religions think that you're born with a human nature that is evil. And I suppose I've pretty much taken the stance where you can't know that to be certain. And so, but you can't know it not to be certain. Perhaps, you can't know it not to be true, at least, that, yeah, perhaps, perhaps all humans do have a supposedly sinful nature. But even if it wasn't, like, even if you could at least, or you should at least recognize that even if humans do not have a sinful nature, they have an evolutionary nature that, or the circumstances in the world are such that people will do bad things. And it's not necessarily because they want to do the bad things, that sort of thing. It's some of the circumstances that they're born into. It's sort of like an expected response from a human to their environment. Given that set of circumstances that happen to them, you would expect that they would do things that a lot of other people would consider bad things. And maybe even they themselves would consider bad things. And so you could contribute that to like evolutionary behavior, or essentially just the circumstances in the world are such that people will do bad things. And how exactly would you address that? How would you I do think that inspiration and changing of the environment and circumstances, creating abundance, creating accountability, it's sort of a holistic solution. There's no one trigger solution. Like, possibly that's why various religions were invented, to offer like a sort of simplified solution for how to help people not to just go with their whim of human nature, but to try to strive and do better things. So they invented a god for this and that, and then sort of people follow that and do a higher calling, which prevents them from doing, or helps them to live a better life. And that's sort of controlling, but it's a simple solution. But yeah, it's controlling, and that's not something like, it's not satisfying to people who are not satisfied by those mediocre answers. So yeah, I don't think there's any one solution to how to help solve human nature. It's very likely a combination of changing the environment that we live in. I don't think you'd have to change physics. I think physics is fine. I think you just need to change the environment. You have to play out the scenario of each parent raising their children very well. You'd have to play out sort of the abundance and technology scenario. You'd have to play out the people being really intelligent and changing. And you'd have to really work toward creating communities of like accountability. That's sort of what religions are great for, where you have a group of people and they sort of hold each other accountable by the rules that are within the religion. But even if you don't have a set of rules that the group is holding you accountable for, you could at least have you could at least have that community of people who are out there to help each other. And so in that case, yeah, I think we could solve. And then there's probably a bunch of other holistic things. A whole bunch of other things that you would want to do to help sort of prevent all the different things, etc. But then if you could say, okay, let's say that you do all of these holistic things and 20 years in the future, you have 90% of people who are at a very high level of consciousness because of all these things that you've done. You have people that have been raised with this high level of consciousness. So like in general, 90% of people are in this high level of consciousness. Right there, that solves most every problem, because you'd have billions of people with a high level of consciousness who can then make the right decisions, who can then work together to coordinate, to be the force by which the world becomes a better place. I think that is certainly makes sense. But then the other 10% of people, there would probably always, you'd have to assume that there would always be some percentage of people who aren't at the high level of consciousness, which I think would still be fine. Like they would be there, they would be doing things, but as long as the vast majority of people are doing the right thing, you're only probably going to make the lower level of consciousness people group smaller and smaller, and you're going to continue to have high level of consciousness, because it's not like, so like a high level of consciousness isn't like some religious creed where you have to bring more followers into your religious group. A high level of consciousness is like that's helping yourself, and like there's no reason that that's a bad thing in any instance, of course, unless your religion was against that, which that is sort of a big problem. Most religions don't really want you to be smarter and think for yourself, because they benefit from ignorance. But yeah, I guess that is sort of the solution to the issues. Is there's no one small solution. It's a holistic set of things which will eventually create, in a certain amount of time, people with higher level of consciousnesses. And once you have that, and like your circumstances are such, there's sort of a synergy of goodness. And once I think if you had people with high level of consciousness, that is sort of the primary component for the control of human nature. So if you're at like a green level stage of consciousness where you care about the group and you want the greater good and stuff like that, like if you have that, you're not likely to go rob a bank, because that's going to hurt the whole group. Like you could, like maybe your human nature would say, oh, go rob the bank, but that might not even ever cross your mind if your level of consciousness, which is the primary way of sort of expressing human nature. Yeah, like what is human nature? It's the way that our brains work, I think, for the most part. So there's sort of some hormones, but all of that is basically affecting the way your brain works. So your brain health and your brain, the way that works is sort of the primary factor for how human nature is expressed. And so if you have a higher level of consciousness, then your brain will be working at a higher level of human nature. And so essentially what I'm saying is, over the 20 years or whatever time frame, human society might have been able to evolve, like literally evolve to become, and it's not just higher intelligence, it's like the whole spectrum of like a level of consciousness. And I'm sure this is not a new idea. There's probably a lot of solutions. This is probably only part of the answer to the question, but it does sort of make sense. So if I take this back to my movie idea, think about that. Perhaps the movie explores the internal, like, consciousness battle. Perhaps that would be a better way of expressing the whole idea of so instead of the whole thing between like the good version of yourself and the bad version, and you sort of shutting out the good version of yourself, it would be more like a whole metaphorical look at your own brain and sort of the inside, like what you actually do and why. And so yeah, it'd be sort of looking into your brain. And then it would go on this journey of level of consciousness where you would sort of battle through the various stages of the different levels of consciousness, what it would take to likely increase, and you sort of, once you get to certain levels, you can see how the entire world could become much better if everyone raised their level of consciousness. And so, yeah, but it sort of goes through. Also, spiral dynamics eventually supposedly leads to like this state where like you're okay with everything going on. Like you don't really want to make anything better. You're just sort of like okay with everything, which that doesn't sound like the highest level of consciousness to me. But I think I don't think the person who came up with those spiral dynamics, they don't necessarily know what the higher level of consciousness is, what the what the highest level of consciousness are anyway. Like, they're just sort of guessing. Yeah, but it's true. Maybe I have this vision of what a high level of consciousness is, but in all reality, maybe it's not actually what I think it is. So, yeah, I guess I'm trying to think through the movie. First of all, I just don't know how I can even create this movie that I'm thinking about. I just don't know. Like, sure, I could do 3D world building and stuff, but like, I think it's gonna mostly have to be me writing out a script where most of the information is portrayed via words, and then there's some visuals. Perhaps I've been able to create a couple virtual scenes where I'm able to express ideas while I'm talking. So it would probably be pretty boring compared to like an action movie, but it would be better than just reading some treatise for something or another. About how things could be solved. Of course, you could always write a book, but most people don't necessarily want to read a book. I mean, yeah, I could. Maybe I'll just... Anyway, I think I do just need to like write the script. Even if I can't envision how it's going to happen, I have the mind map of the script, and I think I need to include this human behavior thing as a big part of that whole script. Of like the original Constitution. Well, let's see. I need to have the original Constitution written as well, which the original movement coordination should probably be focused on affecting the way that humans evolve their consciousness. The whole thing is just so complicated. I feel like I'm drowning in the fire hose of like the millions of fire hoses shooting at me from all these different angles of the problems in the world. And me standing there in the middle of all of them thinking somehow that I can escape. But, I mean, you have to try. If you don't try at all, then you know you're not going to get out of that. You're not going to escape. But if you try, there's at least a possibility. And what you really want is you'd want a group of people to come down and help you escape. Or you'd want a group of people who are all down there together to realize that if they work together, that's how they can escape. Because truly, I can't come up with the solution on my own. So I think I'm striving for some sort of perfection of the original movement constitution, but it really doesn't need to be perfect. It's just the central ideas should be there, and then expressing them in a way that is compelling and inspiring. And that's how. So I think I'm still fine. Even if I create like a couple basic virtual scenes and do some sort of virtual production where I'm like talking, but it just makes it more interesting because there's like a scene in the background. But I'm just talking, explaining stuff and addressing concerns and laying information out. if I can really like write this script and then rewrite it and then write it again and sort of get this like sort of really condensed, beautifully told narrative about the whole point, what I'm trying to do, that sort of thing, then just like share that. And I think if I have that made, it's not likely that any of it's going to be wrong, but I should still, like, during that rewriting process, make sure that all the ideas that make sense and aren't just, and even if they don't make sense, that if they're wrong, that it wouldn't cause major issues. Because I'm thinking, like, in the future, maybe I wouldn't continue to say, hey, watch this movie if there's some major flaw with the movie. Or perhaps it's a movie where I have follow-ups. I have like a link in the description type of thing with like all of the updates of like, so in the movie I talked about this idea, but really this idea isn't going to work because of this reason. Or when I was talking about this idea, it sounded like I was saying this, but really I was trying to talk about this other idea, which I hadn't directly thought of, but that was the idea that now I've thought of, that, and that's where I was trying to reach for. So that's the ultimate idea. I think there's going to be stuff like that regardless. But yeah, you have to start somewhere. So if I do a state where I've really ironed it out as much as I can, I think that's okay. So yeah, I mean, I really think writing the script, getting it, like writing it out, all that stuff, that is the next step. And it's okay if it seems like an impossibly large task, but I have to try. Okay, thank you so much.